It was 3:17 in the morning when I felt something watching me from the corner of my room. It wasn't the first time I'd woken at that exact hour, but that night was different. My hands were trembling, drenched in cold sweat, and my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I'd been waking up at 3 a.m. for months with no apparent reason, dragging a fatigue that no amount of coffee could cure during the day. I'd lost my job 3 weeks earlier. My marriage was hanging by a thread so thin that any word could break it. But nothing prepared me for what I was about to discover that early morning. What I saw would forever change my understanding of prayer, the spiritual world, and why God allows some people to wake at exactly that hour. And what I learned that night still makes me tremble when I remember it. My name is Robert Harrison. I'm 52 years old, and I live in Johannesburg, South Africa. For 30 years I worked as a systems engineer, a man of numbers and logic. If I couldn't measure it or calculate it, it simply didn't exist for me. Faith was something I saved for Sundays at church, a kind of spiritual insurance I maintained out of habit more than conviction. But before I continue with my testimony, write in the comments where you're watching this from. I want to know what countries this account that changed my life is reaching, because what I'm about to share with you isn't theological theory or religious doctrine. It's what I lived, what I saw, and what I still don't fully understand. It all started 6 months before that decisive night. I began waking at the same time every night, between 2:58 and 3:03 in the morning. At first I attributed it to work stress. Projects were piling up, deadlines were getting tighter, and my mind simply couldn't disconnect. I'd grab my phone, check emails, try to go back to sleep. But there was something strange. Every time I woke up, I felt a presence in the room. It wasn't threatening, but it wasn't normal either. It was as if someone had turned on an invisible light, or as if the air itself had changed density. My wife, Sarah, slept soundly beside me, completely oblivious to what I was experiencing. One early morning, desperate, I told her what was happening to me. She looked at me with that expression everyone had. "Robert, you're working too hard. You need to rest." But I knew it wasn't just fatigue. There was a pattern, a mathematical precision to these awakenings that my analytical mind couldn't ignore. What I didn't know then was that those 3 a.m.s were just the prelude, that God was knocking on my door in the most literal way possible, and that my resistance to answering that call was costing me more than I imagined. 3 weeks later, I was fired. Staff cuts, they told me. 30 years of loyalty reduced to a 2-paragraph letter and a box with my personal belongings. Sarah and I started fighting about money, about the future, about everything, and I kept waking up at 3 a.m. every night without fail. It was a Tuesday in July. I remember the cold because Johannesburg in winter can be merciless. I'd fallen asleep on the couch after another argument with Sarah. The microwave's digital clock showed 2:47 a.m. when I opened my eyes. I knew what was coming. In exactly 11 minutes I would be fully awake. I dragged myself to bed trying to beat the clock, but it was useless. At 2:59 a.m. I was completely awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling that familiar presence, but now more intense. And then, for the first time in months, I did something different. Instead of grabbing my phone or trying to go back to sleep, I closed my eyes and whispered, "Okay, if it's you, God, here I am. What do you want from me?" The silence that followed was so dense I could feel it on my skin. I waited. 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes. Nothing. I felt ridiculous, like a child talking to an imaginary friend. But just when I was about to give up, I heard something. It wasn't an audible voice, but words that appeared in my mind with a clarity I'd never experienced. Wait, watch, learn. My heart began to race. I opened my eyes slowly, and what I saw froze my blood. In the corner of the room next to the closet there was a figure. It wasn't a shadow or a trick of the light. It was a defined silhouette, radiant, but not in the way a lamp illuminates. It was as if light emanated from within that form. I couldn't move. It wasn't sleep paralysis because I was completely conscious. It was pure astonishment. The figure didn't move for what seemed like an eternity. And then, with a voice that sounded like wind through trees but with perfectly clear words, it said, "You finally listen. I've been calling you at this hour for months." I wanted to scream, "Wake Sarah," run from the room. But something in that voice kept me immobile. It wasn't fear I felt, or at least not just fear. It was reverence. It was the sensation of being in the presence of something holy, something that didn't belong to my everyday reality, but was more real than anything I'd ever touched. "Who are you?" I managed to articulate the words with difficulty, my throat dry as sandpaper. "I am a messenger," the figure responded, "and I've been sent to show you what happens in this world when someone prays at 3 in the morning. The hour you call the dead hour is actually the most alive hour of the spiritual realm." The figure began to move, not walking but gliding, approaching my bedroom window. It gestured with what seemed to be an arm toward the night sky. Look, I don't know how to explain what happened next. The window was still there, the glass was still glass, but through it I no longer saw the lights of Johannesburg. I saw dimensions, layers of reality that existed in the same space, but at different frequencies, and in those dimensions, there was activity, a lot of activity. I saw shadows crawling between houses, dark entities seeking entry points into homes, but I also saw light, golden columns of light rising from some houses toward the sky, like beacons in the darkness. And around those columns of light, there were figures like the one in my room, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, moving with purpose. 3 in the morning, explained the angel, because that's what it was, though my logical mind still fought against that reality, is when the veil between your world and the spiritual is thinnest. It's when the darkness does its most aggressive work. But it's also when the prayers of intercessors have the most power, because they're praying when few others are. It pointed to one of the columns of light. That's a 73-year-old grandmother who lost her son in an accident 2 years ago. She's been waking at this hour since then. She doesn't know why, she only knows she must pray. Her prayers have saved 3 marriages on her block, prevented 2 suicides, and brought conviction to a drug dealer who will soon leave his life of crime. My scientific mind screamed that this was impossible, but my eyes saw, my spirit felt, and something deep within me knew this was true. "Why me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why wake me? I'm an engineer, a man of science. I don't even know how to pray correctly." The angel turned toward me, and though I couldn't see its features clearly, I felt its penetrating gaze. "Precisely for that reason, God doesn't need your eloquent words. He needs your availability. He needs your presence in this place of battle when no one else is awake." It showed me another scene. It was my own house, but from a perspective I'd never seen. I saw Sarah sleeping, but over her there were dark shadows, whispering. I couldn't hear the exact words, but I understood the message. Divorce, hopelessness, abandonment. My heart constricted. "She's under attack," the angel said, "and you've been being awakened to intercede for her. But instead of praying, you've been resentful about losing sleep. You've been browsing social media while your wife fought a spiritual war inches from you." The words hit me like hammers. Every night I woke up, every early morning I ignored that call to pray. Sarah was being bombarded with thoughts of leaving our marriage, and I, too busy seeking logical solutions, had ignored the real battle. What do I do? Tears began rolling down my cheeks. How do I fight something I can't see? "You can already see it," the angel responded. "And now that you know, you have a choice. When you wake at 3 a.m., you can keep resisting, or you can get up and pray. You don't need perfect words. You need a willing heart." The angel extended what seemed to be its hand toward me. "There are armies waiting to be activated by your prayers. There are answers from heaven that can only be released when someone on earth asks for them. 3 in the morning isn't a curse, Robert, it's an invitation." The vision faded as quickly as it had begun. The window returned to showing the familiar lights of Johannesburg. The angel's figure began to dissolve, its light dimming like a candle in the wind. But before disappearing completely, I heard its last words. "Start tonight, pray for Sarah, and watch what God does." I sat on the bed, trembling. I looked at the clock, 3:23 a.m. Only 24 minutes had passed, but I felt as if I'd lived a lifetime. Sarah was still sleeping, oblivious to the battle being waged over her, oblivious to the encounter her husband had just had. The silence in the room was deafening. I could hear my own breathing, accelerated, choppy. My hands were still trembling. Part of me wanted to shake Sarah, wake her, tell her everything I'd just seen. But another part, the part that had just witnessed the sacred, knew that this moment was mine alone with God, that there are things one cannot transmit with words, only with obedience. For the first time in months, I knelt beside the bed. The wooden floor was cold against my knees. I had no eloquent words. I didn't know intercession protocols or spiritual warfare doctrines. I only had my broken heart and a wife who needed help. "God," I whispered in the darkness, my voice breaking. "I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to pray correctly. But if what I saw was real, if you've really been calling me at this hour to fight for my marriage, here I am." The words came out clumsy, disorganized. It wasn't the polished prayer of a preacher. It was the desperate cry of a man who had just seen that his world was much bigger and more complicated than he'd ever imagined. Protect Sarah. Drive away those dark thoughts from her. Restore what I've destroyed with my pride and my distance. As I prayed, I began to see with new eyes all the times I'd failed. Every night I came home late from work without a call. Every time I ignored her while checking my phone. Every argument where I chose to win the argument instead of winning my wife. My engineer's pride. My need to be right. My inability to show vulnerability. All of that had built a wall between us, brick by brick. And the dark forces the angel showed me had used each of those bricks as a foothold to whisper their lies to Sarah. He doesn't love you. He doesn't value you. You'd be better off alone. Forgive me, I whispered, tears beginning to flow freely. Forgive me for being so blind, for being so absorbed in my career, in my problems, in my pride, that I didn't see the battle she faced. Forgive me for all the nights I woke at this hour and ignored her, while you were calling me to fight for her. I prayed for 40 minutes. Sometimes with words, sometimes just in silence, feeling things I couldn't articulate. There were moments when words ran out, and I could only stay there, kneeling, hands raised, feeling a weight in my chest that gradually lightened. At some point in that prayer, something changed. It wasn't dramatic. There were no lights or angelic voices this time. It was more subtle, like when dawn breaks, and you don't realize the exact moment darkness becomes light. You only know that what was black now has colors. The atmosphere of the room transformed. The heavy air I'd felt for weeks, that oppressive weight I attributed to unemployment stress, dissipated. The room felt lighter, more peaceful, as if someone had opened an invisible window and let in fresh air. I looked at Sarah sleeping. Her face, which had lately been tense even in dreams, now looked peaceful. Her shoulders, which she always kept hunched from tension, were relaxed. And then I saw it. Or rather, I stopped seeing it. Those dark shadows the angel had shown me over her were no longer there. I don't know if I was given spiritual vision for those minutes, or if I simply felt it in my spirit, but I knew with certainty that the battle had changed direction. When I finally returned to bed, it was 4:03 a.m. I'd prayed for a full hour without realizing it, and for the first time in months I fell asleep without that anxiety that had accompanied me every night. Without that knot in my stomach thinking about bills to pay, the lost job, the crumbling marriage. I slept deeply. No disturbing dreams, no sudden awakenings, and when I opened my eyes the sun had already fully risen. The next morning Sarah woke me with coffee. She hadn't done that in weeks. Months, maybe. I stared at her, still half asleep, not knowing if this was real or part of a dream. "Good morning," she said with a small but genuine smile, something I also hadn't seen in a long time. She sat on the edge of the bed, holding her own cup. "I had the strangest dream." My heart began to race. "Yeah, tell me." "I dreamed you were fighting for me, like a warrior or something. There was, I don't know, darkness, I think, and you were there, standing between that darkness and me. You weren't using a sword or anything, you were just praying." She laughed softly, as if embarrassed. "It'll sound silly, but it made me feel loved, protected." Tears returned to my eyes, but this time I didn't hide them. I couldn't. The God of the universe had shown my wife exactly what I'd been doing while she slept. He'd validated my prayer in a way no words of mine could have done. I took her hand, and she didn't pull away. Her fingers intertwined with mine, a simple gesture we'd lost somewhere in our troubles. "It's not silly," I told her, my voice hoarse with emotion. "Not silly at all. For the first time in months, we talked, really talked. Not about bills or unemployment or the day's responsibilities. We talked about us, about what we felt, about the fears each of us had been holding. Sarah confessed she'd been considering divorce, that she'd thought maybe I'd be better off without her, or her without me, that the thoughts had been so persistent, she almost believed them. And though I didn't tell her about the angel that morning, that would come later, when she was ready to hear it, I told her the truth about my part. I told her I'd been a terrible husband, that my pride had blinded me, that I was willing to change, to fight for us. "I want to fight for our marriage," I told her, squeezing her hand. "I want to be the husband you deserve. I don't know how to fix everything overnight, but I know I want to try. With you." She cried. I cried. And somewhere in those shared tears, something that was broken began to heal. That night, I went to bed early. Not from fatigue, but from anticipation. I knew that at 3 a.m. I would wake again, and this time, I was ready. The following weeks were a revolution in my spiritual life. I kept waking at 3 a.m., but now I expected it. More than that, I longed for it. It was as if my body and spirit had synchronized with a celestial clock I'd never known existed. I established a routine. When my internal clock woke me, because I didn't even need an alarm anymore, I'd get up silently, grab a blanket so as not to wake Sarah with the light, and kneel in the living room. At first, I prayed mainly for Sarah. Every night I spent at least 20 minutes interceding for her, declaring protection over her mind, asking God to restore what had been broken between us. And it worked. Every day, Sarah felt a little more like the woman I'd fallen in love with 25 years ago. Her laughter returned. Her touch became more frequent. Conversations flowed more easily. It was like watching a withered flower receive water after a drought. But soon I began to feel the burden to pray for other people. Names appeared in my mind for no apparent reason, faces of people I hadn't seen in months or even years. At first I ignored it, thinking they were just random thoughts, but the angel had told me to watch, to learn, so I started paying attention. One early morning around 3:15 a.m., my sister Patricia's face appeared in my mind with an urgency I couldn't ignore. Patricia lived in Cape Town, over 1,000 kilometers away. We hadn't spoken in weeks. I had no idea what was happening in her life, but the urgency was undeniable. It was as if someone was pushing me gently but firmly to pray specifically for her. So I did. God, I don't know what's happening with Patricia, but you do. Protect her. Give her clarity. If she's in danger, rescue her. If she's making a bad decision, stop her. May your light break any darkness that's stalking her. I prayed for her for 20 minutes, feeling that spiritual burden that's hard to describe to someone who's never experienced it. It's like carrying another person's weight without that weight crushing you. It's pure intercession. 3 days later, I received a call. It was Patricia. She was crying so hard that at first I couldn't understand what she was saying. Easy, Patricia. Breathe. What happened? I don't know what happened, she said between sobs, but last night I was going to make a terrible decision. I was going to leave my family, run away with a man I met at work. I had my bags packed, Robert. I'd written the goodbye letter to Daniel and the kids. I was ready to destroy everything. My heart stopped. Daniel was her husband of 18 years. They had 3 children. But at 3 in the morning, she continued, I woke up with absolute clarity. It was as if someone had shaken me and shown me exactly what I was about to destroy. I saw the pain in my children's eyes. I saw Daniel broken. I saw my life in ruins. And I knew with absolute certainty that I was being deceived. Her voice broke. Robert, it's as if someone had prayed for me right when I needed it most. Is that possible? Can God do that? My skin crawled. Every hair on my body stood up. Patricia, I said, my own voice trembling. What day was this? The day before yesterday, Tuesday night. Tuesday at 3:15 a.m. had been exactly when I prayed for her. Yes, I told her, tears beginning to flow down my face. Yes, God can do exactly that. And he did. I told her what I'd been experiencing. The early morning prayer sessions. How her name had appeared in my mind with urgency that specific night. How I'd prayed without knowing what she was facing. She cried harder. You saved me, Robert. You literally saved me. It wasn't me, I told her firmly. It was God. I just obeyed. I'm barely learning how all this works. But that was just the beginning. The testimonies began to accumulate like evidence in a divine trial. 2 weeks later, my building neighbor, a man named James with whom I'd barely exchanged words in the elevator, knocked on my door one Sunday afternoon. I know this is going to sound strange, he told me, nervous, playing with his keys. But did you pray for me last Thursday? I froze. Thursday at 3 a.m. I'd felt the urgency to pray for someone in my building. I didn't know who. I only knew there was someone nearby contemplating something terrible. Possibly, I said carefully. Why do you ask? Because Thursday night I was going to jump from the building's roof. I had it all planned. I climbed the stairs at 2:30 a.m., opened the roof door, stood on the edge, and at 3 in the morning, just when I was about to do it, I felt something. I don't know how to explain it. A peace that made no sense. A voice that wasn't audible, but was clearer than any sound. You don't have to do this. There's another way out. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I got down from the edge, went down the stairs, called a suicide prevention hotline. I'm seeking professional help now, but I needed to know, did you pray for me? I couldn't speak. I just nodded. Thank you, he whispered. You saved my life. The testimonies kept coming. A friend from work, from the job I'd already lost, called to tell me he'd resisted the temptation to steal money from the company during an audit. I was going to do it, he confessed. I had access. I had the opportunity. But at 3 a.m. on Friday I had such strong conviction I couldn't. It was as if someone was watching me, not with judgment but with love, asking me not to do it. A cousin who lived in Pretoria sent me a message. Are you still awake at 3 a.m? Because for 2 weeks I've been feeling inexplicable peace about my cancer at that hour. The doctors are surprised by my improvement. I didn't tell them anything about what I was doing. I didn't boast about my early morning prayers. I just prayed when I was awakened, interceded for the people God brought to my mind and watched how he moved. It was as if I'd discovered a radio frequency that had always existed but I'd never tuned into. And on that frequency, God was working powerfully, moving pieces, saving lives, restoring marriages, healing diseases, preventing tragedies. And it all started at 3 a.m, when a skeptical engineer decided to kneel and pray instead of cursing his insomnia. 3 months after the first encounter, the angel returned. This time I wasn't scared. It was another 3 a.m. early morning, and I was in the middle of my prayer time when I felt that familiar presence fill the room. You've been faithful, said the voice, appearing again in the corner of the room, that same radiant light emanating from its form, and your prayers have released more than you can see. Show me, I asked, this time without fear. I want to understand more. The angel extended its hand, and again the reality around me changed. But this time, instead of showing me my city, it showed me a global map. I saw lines of light connecting different continents, like a planetary neural network. Each line represented intercessors praying simultaneously in different time zones. Do you see this? The angel asked. When someone in South Africa prays at 3 a.m., someone in Brazil is praying at 10 p.m. Someone in Korea is praying at 9 a.m. God has distributed his intercessors around the world, so there are always prayers ascending. But 3 a.m. in your time zone is especially powerful because it's when the darkness believes it has won. I saw angelic armies moving in response to those prayers. I saw spiritual strongholds being torn down. I saw people being freed from bondages that had lasted generations. And it all began with someone who, in the discomfort of the early morning, decided to say yes to God's call. Why 3 a.m. specifically? I asked. Why that hour? The angel looked at me with what I perceived as a smile. Because it's the enemy's mockery of the hour Christ died, 3 p.m. It's his attempt to take the hour of Christ's victory and turn it into the hour of his dominion. But God, in his wisdom, uses that same hour to raise prayer warriors who destroy the enemy's works. I won't lie to you. Waking at 3 a.m. every night isn't easy. There are mornings when my body screams for more sleep. There are days when I arrive at work exhausted, with dark circles no coffee can hide. I've had to make adjustments, going to bed earlier, taking care of my health in ways I used to ignore. My friends think I'm crazy. Robert, you need to see a doctor, one of them told me when I shared that I wake every night at the same time to pray. That's not normal. It's insomnia, stress, something that needs treatment. And maybe they're partly right. Maybe a doctor would prescribe something for me to sleep soundly all night. But then I'd remember my sister, who still has her family intact. The neighbor who decided to live instead of ending his life. Sarah, who smiles again, who takes my hand at church, who says she's fallen in love with me again. Is it worth sacrificing a few hours of sleep to see God move like this? For me, the answer is clear. Every early morning I get up. I don't do it out of religious obligation or to earn points with God. I do it because I've seen the other side. I've seen what happens when someone dares to pray, when no one else does. 2 weeks ago, Sarah woke with me at 3 a.m. I didn't say anything to her, but she felt it. She knelt beside me in the living room and began to pray too. Her words were simple, beautiful, powerful, and in that moment, I knew God hadn't just called me. He'd called us as a couple to be watchmen in the dark hours. 6 months after that first angelic encounter, my life is unrecognizable. No, I haven't recovered my previous job. In fact, I started a home business that's barely getting off the ground. Financially, we're still tight, but there's a richness in our life that money could never buy. Sarah and I didn't just save our marriage, we transformed it. We pray together almost every early morning now. We've seen healings in our extended family. My niece was healed of epilepsy after months of intercession at 3 a.m. My father, who'd been an atheist his whole life, gave his heart to Christ at 78 after what he describes as an inexplicable encounter with God's peace that he had, guess at what time, at 3 in the morning, I've learned that hour isn't magical, it's not a ritual or a formula. It's simply a moment when God has chosen to move his hand in a special way, a moment when the veil is thinner, when prayers seem to have additional weight in the spiritual realm. And I've learned something else. Not everyone is called to wake at 3 a.m. Some are called at 4, others at 2, others at different times of day. The important thing isn't the hour itself, but obedience to the call. When God persistently wakes you at a certain time, it's not to bother you. It's because there's work to be done, battles to be won, lives to be saved. The angel hasn't appeared visually again since that second visit, but I feel its presence frequently during my early morning prayers. Sometimes it's just a sensation of not being alone. Other times it's a certainty that my prayers are being heard and answered in real time. If you're reading this and you've been waking inexplicably at certain hours of the night, I want you to consider something. What if it's not insomnia? What if it's not stress or anxiety or any sleep disorder? What if it's God calling you to a place of intercession that few are willing to occupy? I'm not telling you to ignore medicine or romanticize insomnia. If you have legitimate sleep problems, seek professional help. But also ask God if there's something more. Ask him if he's inviting you to a deeper level of relationship with him, to a place of spiritual authority that's only accessed through prayer in the silent hours. Think about the people in your life who are struggling, your spouse who can't overcome depression, your child who's making bad decisions, your friend who's on the verge of divorce, your family member who's battling an illness. What if God is waking you precisely to intercede for them when the dark forces are working most aggressively? I've learned that spiritual warfare doesn't always look like dramatic exorcisms or obvious supernatural confrontations. Sometimes it looks like a 52-year-old man kneeling in his living room at 3 in the morning, whispering prayers with tears in his eyes, fighting battles no one else can see, but that are absolutely real. And I've learned that the enemy fears the nocturnal intercessors more than he fears famous preachers or big ministries, because the early morning intercessors are the ones who dismantle his plans in secret, who release answers from heaven that change the course of lives without seeking credit or recognition. If you feel that call, if you recognize that urgency to pray in the dark hours, don't ignore it. Because on the other side of your obedience are lives waiting to be touched, marriages waiting to be saved, destinies waiting to be redirected. Your yes at 3 in the morning could be someone else's no to suicide. Your prayer in the darkness could be someone else's light in their most desperate moment. I don't know what time it is where you are as you read this. I don't know if you've ever experienced anything supernatural or if all this sounds completely foreign to your reality. But I do know this. The spiritual world is as real as the physical, and there are battles being fought right now that will determine the course of lives, families, and nations. The question isn't whether those battles exist. The question is whether you're going to be part of the solution, whether you're going to allow God to use you as an instrument of his light in the darkest hours, whether you're going to say yes when he calls you, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it doesn't make logical sense, even if your friends think you're crazy. My life changed because an angel showed me what happens when someone prays at 3 in the morning. But the greatest revelation wasn't seeing the spiritual realm. It was realizing that God was inviting me to actively participate in his work, to be his hands and his voice in a world that desperately needs his intervention. If this testimony touched you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. There are people in your circle who are waking at strange hours, feeling frustrated, seeking medical answers that don't come. Maybe they need to hear that God is calling them. Maybe your sharing this account is the bridge they need to understand their own calling. And if you want to know more about angelic encounters, about how the spiritual world intervenes in our everyday reality, stay tuned. Because this isn't the only testimony. There are more stories, more encounters, more revelations about how God moves in the lives of ordinary people who dare to believe in the extraordinary. The next account I share could change your perspective on angelic protection in ways you never imagined. Don't miss it. May God bless you. And if tonight you wake at 3 in the morning, you already know what to do. Get up, pray, and watch how God moves.